In this exercise, I'll be introducing you to the GameSalad environment, and we're going to create a simple environment as well as a little interactivity with a game player. I do have a finished file open here now, which is what will be the objective for today's exercise. And when you launch GameSalad, you'll probably get this little starter screen that pops up. If you don't want it to show up again, just click the Don't Show Again button. Otherwise, click Continue to GameSalad to have it disappear. And now we are in the GameSalad environment. As I said, I do have a finished file here right now, so let me briefly explain some of the work areas, if you will. Of course, we have our pull-down menus up here, but there's four basic sections that you can see here. This first one in the upper left is known as the library, and it defaults on the library item known as actors. Actors are basically what we call the elements that we put on the stage, and they can vary greatly. They can be graphic elements, they can be photos, they can be text elements, they can be video. They can be a lot of different visual elements that go on the stage. Over here we have what are called the scenes. Every file starts with what's called the initial scene. We're mostly going to work with one scene for the most part until we get later into the chorus. The next tab over are the layers, and then back to our actors. And we have one here for media, one here for behaviors, and one here for tables. Today we're going to work basically with the behaviors and the actors tab. Now down below here we have three tabs for the various types of attributes. We have game attributes, scene attributes, as well as actor attributes. And this will only reflect when we have an actor selected. So if I were to pop this tab open, you can see I have two actors, one called Brick and one called Player. The red elements here are what are the bricks, and you'll see shortly how we can manipulate their shape and location on the stage. And this light blue element is the player. There's the attributes for the brick, for example, and here are the attributes for the player. Now this section up here is known as the stage, and this section down here is known as the backstage. It's really the programming features that are attributed to the element that is currently selected. For example, we have player selected right now, and these are some of the behaviors that are attached to that. Now we can hide that, or we can change our environment here like this, but usually I like to just hide it with the toggle backstage on and off. And there is the full stage in full view. And this stage happens to be an iPad environment. So it's got the same iPad dimensions. Alright, so if I go on the stage, I can click on certain elements, and you can see these are the red brick elements right here. And this is the player element. So let me just demonstrate what's happening here, and then we'll talk about how to build this and actually do create a new file from scratch. So I'm just going to click the play button, which is the green arrow at the top here. And that gives us a preview. And you saw it at the very beginning to start with. Our player was hanging in the sky, and I'll just call it gravity. We're going to imitate gravity, and it fell to the platform, had a little bit of bounce, and then finally settled down. I'm just going to move my cursor over to the side here. If I hit my left arrow, I can move it to the left. If I hit my right arrow, I can move it to the right. If I hit my space bar, I can make it jump. Now this is a very basic lesson, so you can only hit one key at a time the way we're going to create it today. But space bar allows it to jump, and the other thing which is subtle is it will only move, it will only be triggered by the keyboard moves when it's sitting rested on the red area. So if it's hanging in the air, the keyboard will not affect it the way we're going to build this today. And that's basically creating conditions where it will only operate under certain conditions. Okay, so if I come and move it over here, it will eventually spill off the staircase and fall to the floor, if you will. Now the other thing to be aware of is that it actually is acknowledging the red as a solid that it can't pass through. Just want to put that out there for now. And here we go. And then finally it's going to drop to the floor. And it actually does accelerate like gravity. and it again does have a certain bounce, which we will control through our attributes. And there is my left and right movement once again, and my space bar. So let me click back to editor and talk around a little bit of how we created this, and then we'll create it. So I am going to click on the brick to start. In my actor attributes, I went into the color, I clicked on the color chip, and I called up the red, and I clicked OK. And that's how I established the color. For the size, the brick is 50 by 50 pixels as a default, which you can see in the preview here. And we just open size, and you double click on the value, and you just type it in. And then hit your enter key to submit that. Now there are a lot of different attributes that you can see here, but we're going to just work with the size and the color mostly for the physical attributes. And then if I scroll all the way down, there are some physics attributes that I want to work with as well. So let's open that up, drag it down till I can see all the attributes. And what I want to change today is, you can see that there are default values. I want to change the bounciness to 0, where this has 0 bounciness when something collides with it. The reason for that is I'm going to put all the bounciness attributes onto the player. What would happen is it would measure or average the two different numbers if there were two different numbers. I want to keep it straightforward and simple, so I'm going to make the platforms all 0, and later on the player I will add an attribute of a certain amount of bounciness. Bounciness for the value 1 equals it will bounce to the same spot that it began with, and anything lower will have a decay. The bricks, if they could move, they won't topple. In this case, we actually have movable unchecked, so this is a little redundant having that checked, but I'll leave it anyway. Movable is unchecked, and that's what's critically important for this. Otherwise, these would go flying. They would react to whatever collision occurred. Okay, so let's go over to the player now. And you'll notice there's a lot of stuff input here. Each one of these boxes are behaviors or what are called rules. So let me explain the difference here. A behavior is more simple than a rule, and it's under the behaviors tab, and there is a big list of them right here. And you can see here, I'm just going to pull this up a bit further. You can see here I have a behavior called accelerate. I can ultimately double click and change the name, but I left them for now. Accelerate, and I found that under the behavior section here, accelerate. And what you do is you just drag it over to the empty area. Now these can collapse like this if you need more room to work with. You can also turn them off and on individually so that they don't respond unless they're on. So the accelerate, I went in and I changed the direction, and it goes by degrees. 0 degrees is straight to the right, 90 degrees straight to the top, 180 degrees straight to the left, 270 degrees straight to the bottom, and again back to 0 for straight to the right. If you notice, those were increments of 90 degrees each. You could go in between, but those are the straight up and down, left and right. And then an acceleration of 100. So that was the accelerate. Now to prevent them from going through each other, we had to put on what's called the collide. So when it encounters the object that it's told to collide with, it will respond by colliding and not passing through it. So let's go back to our backstage here. And if I open up collide, again I got it through the behaviors panel here, dragged it in here, and then set it. And I set it to bounce when actor of type is called brick. That's the red thing. Remember, we're talking about the behaviors attached to player here. So when it collides with the brick, or when it encounters with a brick, it will collide. It will not penetrate, go past it. It will simply collide. And then I created what are called rules, which we can create up here. And if I create a new rule here, it has a set of conditions that we can add. Then we have commands under the do, and we have alternate commands under the else. So it's a conditional, do this or else do that. So we're going to have a simple set of rules and one command. We won't be using the else feature today. So I'm just going to actually delete that by highlighting it and hitting delete, and open up a finished one called move right. And I change the name by double clicking and typing in the new name. Now I added each of these conditions by going up to conditions up here. And the first condition I added was collision. Again, I dragged it in like this and dropped it, and I set it to brick. Then the second condition I added was called key, and I dragged in key, and then I just typed into the box here and I cleared what was in there by default, and I set the key by hitting the actual key that I want to set. For example, if I delete this and hit the right arrow key, it will fill it with the word right. And if I was to hit spacebar, it would do it for spacebar, and so on. And then the do, I had to drag in a behavior called move. And that's under behaviors down here. And I just dragged in move. And again, it's set to degrees, so I wanted this to move horizontally to the right, so the degrees is set to 0. And I wanted it to go fairly fast, so I left it at 300. And this behavior creates this effect right here as soon as it stops. Okay, so let's go back and talk about the conditions once more here. It has to be sitting on the brick, it has to be collided, has to be connected to the brick, overlaps, and the right key needs to be pressed. So 2 conditions to allow for this move to take place. Now I actually made a shortcut. With the Alt key, I clicked and dragged, and I created a copy. And then I went in and double clicked and changed the name to move left. Now I'm going to delete this one and show you what move left is. Very much the same, except I deleted the key and typed in the left key. And then under do, I changed the direction to 180 degrees. And that's all I had to do for that. Now the last one, jump, has a little change in it. I actually created a different, or I used a different behavior for it. So let's start though with the 2 conditions. Once again, these are already there because I copied this from the move left, changed the name to jump, and then changed the key to my spacebar. And under do, I deleted the move command and then added what's called a change velocity right here. Dragged it into the do section, and you do have to be careful when you're dragging. I changed the direction to 90 degrees, meaning straight up, and with a little trial and error I determined 100 was reasonable for that. And that created the jump. Now one more thing I think I failed to mention, under the actors for the player, under the physics, if I said this before, you're going to hear it again, but I don't think I went over the physics for the player. So again, I just changed the color. I picked this aqua color here and I clicked OK. The size, I made it 50 by 50. And down here under physics, I changed the bounciness to 0.5. I checked off fixed rotation, and I made sure movable was checked. So these 3 elements, bounciness, 0.5, fixed rotation, check, movable, check. Leave the other values set at their default settings. And I believe that covers everything. Let me just hide the backstage here again and hit preview. So the accelerate command is what gives it that fake gravity. The collide behavior is what allows it to sit on the red and not just pass through it. The rules, which I created, which is the condition, is it must be sitting on the red and a certain key must be pressed. So if I hit the left key, the command move right is executed. And that was by creating a move with a 180-degree angle set at 300. And the move right is the same as move left, except for the direction is 0. Jump is the spacebar, and that was a change velocity. It just gives you a smoother effect. You can try the move. It's just going to be much more rigid and a little more clunky. So we tried a change velocity on there. And again, you see that bounce. That's the 0.5 bounciness set on player. And then if it comes over here, it will not tumble because we set the rotation to not rotate. And I'm just using my right arrow key and I'm going to make it drop to the floor. And this is how I built this first exercise, 2B, or 2A rather, called Platformer Basics. And we'll just go back to the editor. And that's how it was built. So at this point, I'm going to create a brand new file from scratch, and we'll do it step by step. So I'm going to start by going File, New. And yes, I'll save what I've created. Here we go. And this is for my new file. And just call it your last name. Underscore 02A, which is the lesson name. And choose iPad landscape. I believe it's on default, but just make sure through the platform. And you can check resolution independence. It's not really going to affect our lesson, but basically that will allow it for high resolution iPads as well. So just click Create Project. And you'll start off with a blank project. And I'm just going to move a few things around. This is the backstage area. So again, here is my actor area, my library. The actor is the one tab we're going to work with, as well as behaviors. And my attributes right now is checked on actor. So when I create an actor, I will see its attributes down here. And ultimately, I'll be dragging behaviors down here when I have selected a particular actor. So let's start by creating our first actor, which is the brick. And you can double click that and just name it brick. Hit your enter key. So we'll just affect some of its attributes right away, such as the color and the size. I'll click on the color chip, just choose red and click OK. And under size, just slide that down there. We're going to just make it 50. Enter. Double click on the value there, 50, enter. So it's 50 by 50 and it's red. At this point, I can actually start to build it on the stage. So I'm going to hide my backstage for now and show you how we can drag an actor onto the stage. So this actor has the basic features of being 50 pixels square and being red in color. So we just literally drag that to the stage, and when you let go, you'll see it. So you see all those handles there. That's how we can actually resize things. So I'm just going to quickly set up a floor and some walls. I won't bother putting a ceiling in. Now I can also duplicate by clicking Alt drag. Alt clicking and dragging. And there we have some walls and a floor. I'm just going to hit save. I'll do save as actually here. And we'll just name it the name that I named the file, last name underscore 2A. This is in a folder I have created for GameSalad exercises, and you should have such a folder yourself for all of your exercises. Alright, so I'm just going to build that little staircase in the sky, if you will. And we'll start with the bottom one here, and I'll just move it into place. I'm just going to duplicate this with my Alt Command key down, and then drag these guys out and resize them. One more Alt click and drag. And just move this guy up there. And how about like that? All right, again, I'll just hit save here. And now I'll introduce the player. So we'll create a new actor. We can click on the plus sign up here. I will name it by double clicking player. Hit my enter key. And let's again give it some basic features. We'll also make it 50 by 50 pixels square. 50. I'm hitting my enter key to submit these numbers. And the color, I'll just pick that light aqua color. From the top row, click OK. And you know what? I'm going to introduce it to the stage now, and then we'll start to apply various physics attributes and behaviors. So the player, what I want to do is I want to start it here so that it actually drops like there's gravity on it, and it lands on the top staircase, if you will, here. Now, unfortunately, as far as I know, I can only pick one thing at a time on the stage if I wanted to move things around. Because I was thinking maybe I'll just move these guys down a bit. So you can't do a shift click. It's a little clunky that way, but we'll deal with it. And there we go. Okay. Again, I want to introduce the player, so I'm just going to drag the player out to the top here, and when I release, it does become visible on the stage, and I think I'll just quickly save there again. So all my elements are now on the stage. If I was to hit the preview button, absolutely nothing would happen. You would just see it because I have not attached any behaviors at all with respect to movement. So we'll go back and we'll start by applying some movement to the player. So now I'm going to show you something here. When I click away, for example, and I highlight player, in my backstage area, you'll notice there's a tab called player with the word prototype. Prototype is when I select it over here, and I'm going to say, unless otherwise directed, always select it here and select prototype. If I was to select it on the stage, a new tab appears called instance. Just to briefly explain it, the prototype is like the core, and instance is an instance of the core element on the stage. So in theory, I could drag 3 of these guys on the stage, and whatever is set in the prototype will be embedded inside of each of these elements. However, if I was to go over to the instance and unlock it, it would make it unique all of a sudden, and anything I apply to prototype would no longer be applied to that unique instance. It's kind of like a black sheep that's broken from the family, if you will. It's how we can sort of start with certain sets of features and then make each element instance on the stage have its own unique qualities, if you will. We won't be getting into any of that today either, and let me actually just highlight that and delete that guy and delete that guy. So again, if you do see the 2 tabs, stay on the prototype tab. That was a mouthful, but it's really important because otherwise when you're editing it, it actually would not change within an instance. Something we'll do in another lesson. So let me add some fake gravity. I'm going to go over to my tab called behaviors, and I do have a behavior called accelerate that I'm going to use, and I'll accelerate it in a downwards motion. So we apply the behaviors by dragging them to the backstage when our actor has been selected. So here we go, accelerate, drag it here, and you'll see that blue bar, and it comes with its own set of properties, if you will. The direction, once again, is based on the degrees. I want it to go downwards, so to cut to the chase, as we know, 270 degrees is a downwards motion. I can enter that. Accelerate, I'm going to leave it at 100. And there's a feature called relative to actor or to scene. In this case, it wouldn't make a difference, but I'll say relative to scene. Okay, let me just save that and test it. I'll tell you right now, it's going to be far from perfect, and some strange things will happen. But by testing, you can figure this out quickly and then deal with it. So here we go. I'm going to test it by hitting play. And it's going straight through. I can reset this, but it's going straight through. All right, so let's go back to the editor and deal with that. So what that feature is known as is it's called collide. So we want it to be able to collide with the red object called brick. So we do have a behavior called collide, and I'm going to add that. I'm going to pull my backstage taller here. And I have a behavior called collide, so I'm just going to drag that in now. Now collide, you have two elements, actor of type, actor with tag. We haven't done tags yet. We'll deal with that again in another lesson. But you get a list of all your other actors, or rather all the actors. And we are currently dealing with the player. You can tell by the tab name, player. So I want to say when the player encounters the brick, I want it to collide. In other words, do not pass through it, bounce off it, or land on it, but do not pass through it. So if I hide this here, let's see what happens now when I hit play. So boom, there it goes. However, when it hits the bricks, they start to go flying and some tumbling starts occurring with our actor called player. So two things we want to deal with. Let's deal with the most critical one, which is how these red guys are getting bounced all over the place. Let's lock them down. Okay, so we need to go back to our Actors tab, select Brick, and that's a feature we have under Physics in our attributes. So if I pop open Physics, and then just slide down here, we have a feature called Movable. I'm just going to uncheck Movable. That should address that whole issue. Let's quickly check the play button and try that again. And there you go. Now it's acting as a solid platform because we took away the movable property, the movable attribute. You will see that the blue player is bouncing, and it's literally bouncing back to the same spot every time. So there is no decay right now. So I want to put a decay in to sort of imitate gravity a bit more. So let's go back to the editor, and we can affect this. It's a relative thing, and we can affect it on both actors. So I'm going to start while I'm on the brick. I'm going to go down to the Physics. I'm already down to Physics, and that's the feature called bounciness. So the value currently by default is 1. Let's set that to 0. Hit enter and see what that does. So it's really not doing anything particularly. So I'm going to have to go into the actor called player and lower its bounciness. Now I've noticed on the Mac version, had I left it that way, and I don't know why, but had I left it that way, it would have doubled the bounciness and it actually would have increased it every time. But it seems like the PC version, it doesn't have that same reaction. So you just have to try it and see what happens and then set your numbers accordingly. But let's go to the player, and we'll go down to our Physics, and we will turn the bounciness half. I've done this a little trial and error, and I determined that 0.5 is a reasonable decay. So let's just save our file. I'm going to go Control S on the keyboard, hit my play button, and see what that does. Okay, so that's reasonable. I do like that, and it has 3 or 4 bounces to it, and then it settles down. So the next step I want to do is put 3 keyboard commands in that will affect its motion left, right, and up, and I'll call the up jump. Right now there's nothing that would happen, but it does have that accelerate feature like gravity. If I reset it, we can at least observe that again. Okay, and there we go. So let's go and give some interactivity now to the player. That brings us to a new feature called the rules. The rules are a little more complicated than just behaviors. They tend to incorporate behaviors and conditions. So you see over here I have a rule button, add rule. As I said, there are conditions that need to be recognized, and upon them happening, we can give a command under the do command, and we can also give an alternate command under the else. We're not going to work with else today. We're going to do a simple command here, which is a move command. So first of all, let's start with the conditions. We do need to get those under the Behaviors tab. I'm going to have 2 conditions. One is it needs to be sitting on the red surface, which is known as the brick. Second condition will be the specific key being pressed. So the condition I want to have is known as collide or collision. So I will go in, you can see if I drag up here it says conditions. Collision, we'll drag that down to the top section right here. And now we have this new condition that we can apply. So overlaps or collide. So when it's sitting on it, it's considered overlapping. We will say with the brick. Remember, this is a condition inside of the player, the blue player. So I want to add a second condition now, which is the command that will be applied by pressing a key. So you can see here we have one called key. We'll drag that one down as well, just below it. And if I just insert my cursor into that input box, type on the key I want. In this case, it'll be the right key, the right arrow. So hit your right arrow and it'll input the word right. I imagine you could type it in manually as well, but that's making sure that you have the intended key, if you will. So now I have established two conditions. There's a thing up here called when. We're not going to use the any, but any would mean one of the number of conditions that exist. We're going to say all conditions must be met. But I wanted to point out what this little pull down menu does. It's actually very powerful. We're going to leave it to the default setting of all. So now I'm going to just, oh, it seems like it responds to a scroll wheel. Let me just be careful here and move that up. And I'm going to add a behavior now to the do section, and the behavior is called move that I want to apply. So I'm going to go down here, and it's down under the behaviors, under move, drag that. You got to be careful where you drag it, of course. Move. Now the direction, 0 happens to be the direction I want it to go to, the horizontally to the right. I'm going to leave the speed at 300 as well, which is a fairly good speed. I'm going to leave it at that. I found that that's a nice little speed to go to. Let me save it, Control S. And if this works, when I see it land on the red surface, I should be able to hit my right arrow key and it should move once I hit the key. So we'll let it land. Okay, and right arrow key. There we go. Now it was toppling a bit, so let's go and deal with that topple now. We do have one of our movements, but let's deal with that toppling effect. So back to the editor. I will go back to the actors, to the player, and that was under physics. It's called fixed rotation. Just check that and it will no longer have the ability to rotate. Okay, so now let's go back. We are still in player. I'm just going to collapse these so that I have a little more room to work with. And I'm actually going to name this rule. So I'll double click it, I'll call it move right and hit my enter key. Okay, and I will collapse that as well. But then I'm going to use my alt, click and drag on the move right rule, drag directly below, and that's how I can duplicate it. Because it's mostly the same as the move left except for a couple of features. So I'm double clicking the name. I'm going to call it move left. Okay, so what do I want to change? I want to change which key gets pressed, so I'm going to delete that and then hit my left key. And then under the do, I just want to change the direction. So the opposite of 0 is 180, which is horizontally to the left. I hit my enter key, save my file, and test it. So I'm just going to hit the play button here. So left and right should both work, and the toppling should no longer happen. There's my left and right, and as you see there, it stays horizontal. It doesn't topple over. So the only other thing we need to do to complete this is to add a jump command. So I'm going to quickly go back here, and it's basically the same as the move left and move right, but it's moving up. However, I'm going to leave it with the move. I'm going to show you how it's kind of awkward and rigid, and I'm going to replace the move with something called change velocity. But I will show you initially with the first move command still in there. So alt, click and drag. I will call this one jump. And I'll change the keyboard command, the direction. So I'm going to use my spacebar. And then under the do, on the move command, I'm going to change it to 90 degrees, which is upwards. And we'll give this a try. So This is a very simple exercise, by the way, so you can only hit one key at a time. It will not respond to multiple key presses. Not the way we've set this up, although that is a potential we can do. So spacebar, you see how it's kind of just, yeah, it's very rigid and it's like it hits an invisible barrier. I'm going to just go change velocity, and that gives it a smoother movement. So I will go in and highlight the move, hit my delete key, then go over to my behaviors and find change velocity. So it's under the C's here, change velocity, and then carefully drag that to the do section. And we'll set our direction to 90. And I did find, sort of through trial and error, that 100 to 150 was about right. So let's just say 150 for now. Hit my enter key, and we'll give that a try. So as soon as it settles onto the red surface, I'll hit my spacebar. And yeah, I think I'll bring it down to 100, but that's reasonable, and it does have the smoothness and the decay when it hits the top before it starts to come back down again. But let's just give it a little less on there. So we'll go 100 and try that. And again, give that a try here. There, that's really, that's a little more reasonable for what I'm looking for. So my left, right, my jump. And that's really it. So I'm just going to bring it down to the floor. But this is what I would like you to do for your first actual exercise, if you will. And then you'll zip this up and upload it to Blackboard. You will find the appropriate lesson, and there will be a place for you to browse on your computer to select your zipped file. So let me put this on the floor. We'll do a little bit of left and right and jumping. Again, you can see the decay there in the accelerate command. Well, the accelerate command is what makes it go downward. The bounciness is what creates that decay. And just my left arrow key, my right arrow key, and then I'll stop and just hit my space bar, and there is a jump that occurs, and it's a lot smoother again than the move command. The move command is very rigid, but it certainly has its place. And that's our lesson for today.